Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's DAE debate. Our motion this evening is that all humans would benefit from a universal language. I'll repeat that. All humans would benefit from a universal language. This is a motion of significant importance and full of very loaded terms. These terms I'll briefly unpack before I explain the evening agenda for this debate. By all humans, we mean every single human alive on this planet. To negate any of these humans is to render this invalid. When we say universal language, we mean that regardless of location, nationality, socio-political identity, etc., every single person must be able to speak the language that we define. There have been multiple attempts to create a universal language such as this, the most notable potentially being Esperanto. This was invented by L.L. Zamenhof in 1887. And the word Esperanto is defined as one who hopes. This evening, we wish to find out whether that is a goal worth hoping for. Our debate will consist of opening statements from each of our four competitors, after which there will be a moderated discussion to dive deeper into the topics that they raise, a question and answer, followed by closing statements and a voting count. Before we begin, I would like to give a very warm welcome to our audience, whether that be in the studio with us today, at home, or watching from Residency for the People in Eindhoven. We would like to ask all of our audience at home and in studio to think about questions during the course of the debate that they would like to ask for the Q&A section. Those at home can send it in via the chat, and they will be answered by our lovely participants. Make sure to keep questions open and respectful, and we will be sure to ask them. I would like to invite to the stand our first member of the proposition, Noam. Every report card that Noam had noted her highly disruptive behavior, and we hope that that is what she will bring to the stand tonight. Noam, you have 3 minutes. I'll warn you at 30 seconds and at 10 seconds. Best of luck, your time starts now.
Bagani badu badabadidu. How badadudada la badadida. He gabadubada ra badadida. He da bargagada. Boo da 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 da. Ba da da. Ha ba da da da. Boo ba da ba da ba. Ga da ba da ba. Bada bee bada boo. Bada bee bada boo. I have just wasted my first 30 seconds of my opening statement speaking a language that none of you understood as I made it up as a 7-year-old many years ago. I would like to thank everybody who is allowing this evening to happen, and I would like to thank the fact that we all are able to understand each other tonight and understand all the points that will be made this evening. We are here tonight to talk about a universal language. A language, as the dictionary defines it, is the principal way us humans communicate. A universal language is a way that we could communicate with humans all across the Milky Way, from Pluto to Venus to Mars to the sun to the many other suns. And it's a concept that we all are familiar with. We are used to different ways that we can all understand each other's emotions, fears, joys, and wishes even. And most importantly, a universal language that all humans would speak would mean that finally we could communicate with babies. Babies have really not been stepping up as part of our larger world society, and I think it is time that they finally take their place at the global table. I am passionate about a universal language, as you can see, as I am pounding my fists and raising my voice very high. This too is a language that I know everybody in the universe can understand and can feel my passion, as I again am pounding my fist because I am so passionate for a universal language. I would like to once again thank you all for inviting me here today, and I hope that by the end of this evening, you too will all understand my passion for a universal language. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noam. Thank you. Up next, I would like to call DAFI to the stage as our first speaker from the opposition. DAFI can allegedly sell anything, so watch out, Livni. And we hope that he will sell you on his motion of this evening. DAFI, good luck. You have 3 minutes and your time starts now.
Bada bing, bada ba, bada wa we, wa moi. These have emotions, and I don't need to tell you what they mean. And I don't want to tell people what I want to say if I don't want to share it. And if I'm walking on the street and if I see a very pretty man, and it could be Jurjen dressed in this blue outfit, and I don't want to seem flirtatious, then I want to say, sugoi ne, without sounding flirtatious, because he would understand if I was flirtatious. Not just that, but I love watching anime, and I pride in knowing Japanese without having anybody else know it. So this is personal. I am debating because I have personal reasons to fight, to really stand up for having multiple languages instead of one universal language. Now, let me take a few more instances. Let's talk about babies, because no one brought this out. Every child that is born is not gonna know anything. As a matter of fact, I have been there once, and I didn't know. And then I learned English, and then I learned French, and then I learned German, and then I learned these languages. Okay, French and German are not true, I didn't learn those. But you get my point. You believed me, because we can do that. We have the capacity to learn more, and we have the capacity to dispense that. Languages have an identity, and there's something beautiful about them. The Dutch have the French have le Bordeaux. That is beautiful, and I love that, and I want to keep that, and I want to fight for it. So I'm going to end it short by ending by saying, Esperanto failed. What makes you think you have another shot?
We've had such great speeches already. It's time for us to move on to speaker number 3, our final speaker from the proposition side. Jurjen, I'll call you to the stage. In primary school, Jurjen was called Yuri Puri Curry McFlurry, which he once perceived as bullying, but he's now reclaiming the title for himself. Jurjen, best of luck. You have 3 minutes and your time starts now.
All right. Thank you, Future Number 5, for hosting this event and inviting us to participate. I would also like to thank my fellow debater, and I would also like to thank the opposing team for what I can only perceive as inspiring optimism, yet it will be in vain, because we know that we are standing on the right side of history. All right. First, I want to make sure everybody can hear me, and I get some nods, and I also want to make sure everybody can understand me. I get some thumbs. So this wasn't possible if we weren't all speaking the same language. Can I maybe get a count of hands for who has English as their first language? I see 2 out of, let's say, 20. I think, I'm not sure if I need to make my point any further. We all have inside of us the desire to communicate. And DAFI expressed very eloquently that he loves learning other languages and he loves to, keep it to himself. But what I think DAFI doesn't understand about himself is that all of that comes from the desire to be heard, to be understood by those who speak his language. A language learned for yourself, for no one to hear, is that really a language? Also, he said, languages have emotion. Well, I think emotions are maybe the most fundamental universal language that we have. As my debate partner showed you a smiley face, a not so very smiley face, we all sort of understood what that meant, because we do have embedded inside of all of us the capacity to have a universal understanding. And I think we have more examples. The metric system, it's a language. Everybody is moving towards using it, except for some Americans, but we don't really talk about them. And without that, the world as we know it right now wouldn't have been possible. We wouldn't have the standard of living that we have today. We wouldn't have modern medicine. We wouldn't have dick pics. We wouldn't have anything that we enjoy. And taking that away or not striving to more of that, I personally feel should be illegal. With that, I would like to end my opening statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jurjen. To conclude this section of the debate, I would like to call Paul to the stand. Paul is great at arguing with his teachers, and one time had a girl refuse to converse with him since he's too good with his words. Paul, you have 3 minutes. Your time starts now. Best of luck.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Tonight we're talking about language, and as talking about language, words are very important. So I would like to start with unpacking the notion of all humans will benefit from a universal language. All humans refers to all the members of a widespread and even abundant species of primates that are characterized by bipedalism and also exceptional cognitive skills. The word benefit, coming from the Old French bienfaire, is to do good or to do well, which in turn comes from the Latin benefactum, a good deed. Universal, in a social sense, is meaning common to all society worldwide. Is the whole world really one society? In a metaphysical sense, universal refers to qualities that particularly things have in common. For example, these two chairs have the same quality of chairness. And last but not least, language, the reason that we are all here tonight. It comes from lingua and atticum, the Latin word of related to the tongue. So if we look at this operationalized question, would every one of the abundant bipedal and exceptionally cognitive species of primates do good with a common tonguiness? This question insinuates that all humans, or all bipedal cognitive primates, have the same needs, properties, and cognition. I would like to argue that we don't share the same needs. We don't even share the same tonguiness. According to Wittgenstein, language works by creating images in other people's heads. But we are bad at controlling these images. Hence, the dilemma of language arises. With this in mind, we might already begin to see why a common shared tonguiness between primates will never do good to them. Tongues are highly complex and also very different on every primate. So what about these sensitive tongues? And what about those that have been burned by scorching beverages? Do we really want these tongues to constantly interact and maybe even touch each other? I would argue no. Keep your tongues out of my mouth. A common tonguiness in primates will never lead to any good deed being done. In closing, I think a common language, a common tonguiness, will only lead to worsening situations for bipedal and cognitive primates. Thank you very much.
Wow, what a fascinating start we're off to. There have been so many brilliant points raised on both sides of the aisle, but I would like to dive a little bit deeper into this conversation by beginning with the notion that Noam brought up about votings, yes, of course, sorry. We, before the beginning of this live stream, asked all of our live studio audience to vote whether they were for, against, or undecided on the motion before having heard any of our incredibly convincing speeches. The results were as follows. Those in favor of the motion, that is in favor of a universal language, was 33%. Those against was 42%, and those who were undecided were only 25%. We'll come back to the votings at the very end of our show and tell you how much, if at all, that has changed. Now, to dive a little bit deeper into the wonderful concepts that were brought up by our highly talented speakers, I would like to begin with this idea of language not being purely spoken or purely word-based. Noam was talking about pounding fists, raising your tone to convey passion. I think that this is a really exciting concept, and I would really like for Noam to dive a little bit deeper into whether she thinks that we can communicate non-verbally alone, or whether it's important to have both.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for allowing me to further on this concept of a language not just being a spoken tongue, but also a way we communicate. That is a concept that already exists through sign language, through Braille, through many other forms, and is something that we're all used to, whether it is drawing, whether it is dancing, whether it is grotesque gestures that we all, except for possibly our grandparents, can understand. And I think that it is a pleasure that we are able to dance with each other, whether or not we know the language, and that we're able to turn to our friends and speak in our own language about the person who is dancing too close to us and have them not understand. But without that first too close dancing that we understand as a communication, what sort of gossip would we have to sneak to tell our other friends?
Thank you. I think that this connects quite nicely with one of DAFI's points around this right to privacy and the right to abstraction, and the idea that the world doesn't get to know everything. DAFI, I'm going to pass this over to you. How do you feel that that plays in a world that we have just established communicates not only verbally but also physically? How do you think that you can achieve the same level of a right to privacy and a right to not everybody understanding you in a world that also communicates physically?
Very good question. I think Noam started off very well. I do agree with her points in terms of the Braille, the sign language, something that we wanted to ask you actually. These are also languages, right? So having a universal language doesn't that also mean that Braille and the sign language could be kind of kicked out or overshadowed and completely thrown out?
I'm going to pass this one over to Jurgen to answer. How do you feel about this question?
Well, I think it's an interesting point, but I do wonder, the idea of a universal language is an idea of inclusion, not an idea of exclusion. What if there's a language that incorporates both verbal statements as non-verbal statements? I can see that you have a desire to make distinctions between them, to make us make choices, but I think in a universal language, everybody should be welcome to the party. I like a party. Do you like a party? I think we all like partying, and I think in a universal language, everybody should be sticking each other's tongues in each other's mouths.
Paul? So I think that draws an interesting parallel, explicitly, as you said, with Paul's. But I think also this idea that Paul raised, that humans don't share the same needs, is highlighted in this question about inclusivity and this question about Braille and sign language. So Paul, if humans don't share the same needs, do you think it's even possible for a universal language to exist?
I don't think so. As we've raised in this debate up to this point, I think we all like to communicate in different ways. We like to communicate in a verbal sense, in a non-verbal sense. That brings me to the point that actually a universal language can never truly be universal, because a language isn't just created by all people all at once. It will be created by a certain set of people even. And those people will have, let's say, the ability to use the language to their advantage. And whereas other people might not have the same sort of tongue even, that they cannot participate in this language. So in that sense, I think language can't actually be universal. So we can't even strive for a universal language to exist.
Thank you. With this, I think it's time for us to move on to our Q&A. Any questions that have been sent in or that our audience have ready for us, we're ready to take and distribute amongst the panel.
Okay, I'm
Yeah. Thank you. The question that we received here is, what would a universal language look like? Something that we've touched upon briefly in the course of our debate and our further conversation. But this I'm going to pass over to Jurgen. What do you envision a universal language as being?
Well, obviously that's a very interesting question. And I think we can't truly know, since there hasn't ever been such a thing as a universal language. But we do have some examples that we can look at that are getting closer and closer. And you can look at languages such as English or Chinese or Spanish, where even though the language is a framework that everybody uses to communicate within this language community, there are also local ways the language is used in different places. People in the United States don't speak English the same way as they do in Britain. So language itself is just a framework which then becomes appropriated by its users. So I think a universal language can have variety, can, play to the different needs of people in different places. And I think what it looks like is a language that is a lot of fun, because suddenly you'll be able to communicate with all these people that you haven't been able to communicate with before. And I can't express a greater joy than getting to know someone who I didn't know before.
Thank you, Jurgen. Do you have another question? Wonderful. Simple question, but an important one nonetheless. How many letters would you put in your universal alphabet? I'm going to pass this one over to you. Were there to be a universal alphabet, would you have letters in it at all?
I think I'm the wrong team to ask this because I'm against this.
No, but I disagree because I think these attempts have been made before. Is the complexity of these languages something that you feel undermines them? Is it something that you think is maybe a reason why a universal language wouldn't work?
Well, it really has to do with following up on what my partner said. These languages are formed around the needs of the people there. People describe words, and oftentimes one word can mean multiple things. Like, for an example, Chinese scriptures. If I wanted to consider a mountain, that would just be one word instead of 8 different letters. And it varies depending on the language. And so, depending on where you are, if you want to make your life easier, these people have made these languages so that their life is easier. And making a universal language or having a universal language would force them to kind of go out of their comfort zone of being brought up with this for centuries from what they've seen around, and then choosing to learn something that isn't actually made by their ancestors, but by a group of people somewhere that you never know. Now, if you were to tell me that, yeah, we'll get every person from every group to work on this language, then that would be a combination of multiple cultures into one language.
Interesting that you bring this up, because you speak about this idea of a universal language being unequal, or this idea that language is something created by people to make their own lives easier. But isn't discomfort important? I'm going to pass this over to your teammate if that's okay. And would it not lead to more equality to have a universal language that may push the comfort zones of certain people? How do you see this?
Well, I think this is very interesting because the comfort zone is obviously a highly subjective matter. So I would argue that one universal language that is based on, let's say, one person's life experience can never push everyone's comfort zone in the same way. Let's say, for example, some people prefer hot showering over cold showering. What does that mean for a language to exist in a sense that, one type of showering might have a more concise way of talking about it compared to the other type of showering? Does this exclude people who shower cold?
Interesting points that you raise. And this idea of cultural importance and kind of localized approaches to things really leads into this next question from our audience. How can I conserve my culture with a language not native to me? I'm going to pass this over to you, Jurjen.
To me? The question was, how can I conserve my culture with a language that is not native to me?
Exactly.
All right. I think that's a great question. I think there is, like, I don't like to think in problems. I like to think in solutions. And I think this idea of finding ways to find your culture in a language that we are still crafting, it sounds like an opportunity. It sounds like giving people a voice in a way that they might have never had on a global stage. Giving people a place in a language that we're creating as global citizens or as citizens of this universe. I think it provides more opportunity than it does fighting against people finding their place for their culture within another language. Because I think language and culture, they're obviously linked, but I also think it's good to remind everyone that language is also learned. You're born without speaking a language. So if you can find a way, which I think we could with a global or with a universal language, to grow up understanding your own culture in a universal language, I think this question answers itself.
Thank you. Another theme that we've had throughout these questions is that of music. Music obviously speaks to us all, but is music a universal language? Noam, I'm going to pass this back to you.
I once heard music described as the space between words. I think, again, this is not a new concept that we are discussing tonight. It's something that we all know, whether we can express it through words or not. I think we're here tonight to dream, to imagine something that we might not be able to speak yet, but something that we felt through music, through dance, through many other things, and to dream of what a world would look like in which we could communicate, we could see one another for our full humanness, to imagine what a future world would look like, where we can truly face and truly communicate the greatest issues of our future. I think music is maybe a great starting point to understand, because it's something that we all feel and something we've all connected to before.
We're going to have one final question to wrap this up. And this question speaks to Noam's initial speech about the idea of babies communicating with us. Can babies from all around the world communicate? And if so, what could we learn from it? And how would that influence the idea of a universal language? I'm going to slightly rephrase this. How could the babble of babies that happens all around the world and that we recognize regardless of where it's from, how does that influence our perception of a universal language? I'm going to hand this to you.
Thank you very much. Interesting question. I think there is a lot of assumptions in this question that a baby's babbling would be universal. I don't think all babies have the same ideas, even the same cognitive ability. I think there is such a thing as a stupid baby. And in that vein, I would like to argue that if we were to all just babble instead of speaking words, using alphabets, using all these beautiful things that language has given us, such as pictorial language and euphemisms, I think we would regress in a sense. As Noam has proven in her opening speech, when language fades into babbling, all intellect is lost.
Thank you. We have some questions from online. Excellent.
To Paul's team, is a universal language an alternative to our own languages or a second language? If it was an additional language, couldn't we preserve our identity but communicate with others too?
I'll just clarify that for everybody listening from home. This viewer raised the question of whether a universal language would be the only language spoken or whether it would be a secondary language or a tertiary language, etc., and how that changes your perception of the idea of a universal language.
I mean, I think if a universal language isn't the prime way of communicating, is it truly universal? Is it truly a language? If it is just a means of communicating with people outside of your, let's say, native tongue, outside of your culture that you were born into, doesn't it just become rather maybe an emoji? I mean, is that the world we all want to live in? Do we want to purely communicate with emojis, with babbling, with music? Music some people might find lovely, but others might find disgusting. So in that sense, I don't think that the adding on of yet another way of communicating will ever solve the dilemmas we are facing in transcultural communications. Thank you.
I'm going to give the other team a quick opportunity to respond to this because I think it raises a very interesting approach to this content.
Yes, I think that question is very interesting. And once again, I think it opens up an even more interesting concept of, let's just dream together tonight. Why do we need to debate whether or not a universal language would benefit people, but instead take tonight as an opportunity to dream? My opponent just said that there are stupid babies. But let us take this moment to dream of a world where none of us would ever be deemed a stupid baby. Or better yet, a world where there was no binary between stupid babies and smart babies, and instead we could all just be babies. Thank you.
Another question here. Can a Chinese dog talk to a Spanish dog?
Can a Chinese dog talk to a Spanish dog is the next question we have. You want to take this one?
The answer is yes. Emotions. If I was to yell at someone to move away from my shitting spot, then I think it would be quite easy to understand. Yeah.
Which, I would like to add on, which further proves our point that we do not need a universal language because we can already tell, seeing we are the Spanish dog, we can already tell the other dog to not shit on our spot without the need for a universal language in the first place.
To clarify, the motion is about whether it would benefit us, not whether we need it. And on those grounds, I would like to give you a chance to reply.
Let's say this Spanish dog would just speak Spanish, and let's say the other dog would speak the other language that I forgot. Then they wouldn't be able to communicate. But since they fundamentally speak a universal language, which maybe be the language of smell, they smell so many more things than we do, and we already smell a lot. I smell sometimes. I think it only proves the point of the value of a intercultural, or let's say maybe there will be a point there will be an interspecies universal language. Who has not dreamt of being able to speak to their Spanish or their German or their Chinese dog? So again, we're dreamers, and I think dogs can be dreamers too.
Thank you. From here, we have one more question from the audience. This one is a little bit more abstract. Do we have another one? We have one here. Okay, then we have
a quick reply to this sentiment, actually.
Please.
My opponent is talking about dogs' universal language. As I understand, the motion of tonight is humans' universal language. So yes, dogs smell more than us, but that doesn't mean that we communicate through smell.
Thank you.
Can I just quickly respond to that?
Very quickly.
I think if you have the imagination to think of sharing language with dogs, you can also have the imagination of seeing smell as a metaphor. Everybody has a dog inside of them, a metaphorical dog, which also speaks language. And if the metaphorical dogs inside of us could communicate with metaphorical smell, I think we would have a party.
Thank you. To conclude this portion of the evening, we have one last question from the audience, which is a theoretical one. If a universal language was enforced, would you prefer it to be named Awababa Fama or Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious? I'm going to have hands raised for the first one among you four. We have the audience as well. 1, 2. And hands raised for Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. It's a clear winner. It's the first one. Thank you. So, to get back on track, we're going to invite our wonderful participants back to the stage for their closing statements. Paul, I'm going to ask you to join us first. Keep your statement brief. It's 1 minute 30. Your time starts now.
Thank you very much. According to tonight's topic, the opposing team has once again proven to be stupid babies. The fact that they would even stoop so low to talk about smell as a communication device, I think just further proves how unnecessary and how actually harmful a common language would be to all bipedal primates. Smelling each other, in my mind, is very much a regressive idea of communication. As one of my opponents has demonstrated, by sharing a universal language, we will in fact turn back into 7-year-old children. Furthermore, I would like to argue, if language is stripped of culture, is there any more culture? So if we speak a global language, does that equate a global culture? I don't think so, because by smelling each other, we do not create culture. Also, I would like to argue that the language of music that has been brought forward tonight is in fact just random tones. And furthermore, I do not want to communicate with everyone all at once. If we were to communicate through babbling, I think we just become stupid. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Next, we're going to call Jurjen to the stage. Good luck. Your time starts now.
All right. I started my opening statement with thanking the opposing team for what I thought was their optimistic view for being able to win this debate. Now I'd like to applaud them for their lack of imagination. I think being human is more than being a bipedal primate. I think it's also about being a dog. It's about being a social butterfly. It's about being a sly fox. And I think not allowing humans to express themselves fully in their completeness, I think that is a shame. I think that's a tragedy. I think it makes me sad and I think it hurts me, which I would be able to express to everyone around the world if we all would be speaking the same language. I think one of the points that you made at the very end, which is a point that both you and DAFI have expressed throughout the evening, is there is a need for privacy, there's a need for not wanting to communicate. And I just want to end my closing statement that beyond the dreams and the beauty and the power that a universal language brings within itself, even in a universal language, you are able to keep quiet to yourself. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Jurjen. Next, we're going to call DAFI to the stage whenever you're ready. Once again, we wish you the best of luck, and your time starts now.
Let's say we have the imagination. We all decide to teach everyone a universal language. Does that mean we would be good at it? If the point of communicating is so important, of having this language to communicate. If there are thousands of people, millions, we have billions, that are communicating in a different language, there's some who are going to be really good, and then some who aren't going to be. If we adopt an universal language, it's not really going to allow us to communicate properly, because we'll choose to be comfortable with what we already know. So that would mean us shifting, and that would be a generation lost in trying to teach people to communicate. The people who choose to implement that change now would have to go through an economic crisis to make the language, because this doesn't really make any sense to me. This could help in space, yeah, if you're chilling with some astronauts. But I don't think we should limit our imagination to have different languages. And it hurts me that it hurts Jurjen that we cannot be imaginative with what we want to say and how we see the world. I would like to end my statement now.
Last but most certainly not least, I would like to call Noam to the stage to conclude our speakers for this evening. Noam, your time starts now. Very best of luck.
Thank you for the luck. Once again, I would like to bring back my opponent and I's argument to this concept of dreaming of being able to connect with fellow humans, of a dream, of a mode of communication that's free of gender, free of an innate separation from nature, free of hatred, of policing, full of freedom. I would like to end tonight by sharing some of my other dreams. I dream of being an amazing tap dancer, of being able to shoot a different sauce out of every fingertip of mine. I dream of being able to chill with astronauts. And most importantly, I dream of being able to put my tongue in the tongues of all humans throughout the universe. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you. Well, this has certainly been an evening filled with many different opinions, many different voices. And it's been an evening in which I, at the very least, have learned a lot. At the beginning, we had Noam with a revolutionary and disruptive statement, circling around the joy of childhood, which is a theme that carried on throughout her speeches. DAFI spoke about the right to privacy and abstraction, how a universal language could interfere with that. But Jurjen then brought back this idea of universal languages allowing for global innovation and for the world to progress at large. Finally, Paul spoke about how humans don't share the same needs and questioned how a universal language could ever encapsulate the diversity of those needs amongst people. I can imagine that our audience has had a huge amount to think about, and that many of you may have had different opinions than you did at the beginning of the night. Do we have the results of our new poll? Very exciting. We greatly reduced the number of indecisive people in the audience to 10%. And the group that were proposing this motion get up from 33% to 35%. And the group against jumped from 42% to 55%, making them the winners of the Oxford debate this evening. Thank you so much to all participants. Thank you to our audience. A huge thank you to the Future Number 5 team, to the director Livni, to Nico, and to Carys behind the camera. Thank you to Blanche for the set design, the costume design. Thank you, of course, to the participants, to the audience, to Boye, Mim, Klara, so many others who, without them, this show could not have existed. I want to say a massive thank you and a very good night.